In this episode, we'll be breaking down the sheet goods, the maple, hardwood, and the plywood itself. For breaking down these sheet goods, I decided to use the STM 1800 to lay all my sheet goods on. You could use an MFT. You could also use sawhorses if that's all you've got until you get your MFT cart built. For every project that I build, I always have a cut list of some sort. It could be on my tablet, it could be on a chunk of wood, but that helps me to keep the waste down. With this project, however, there were specific sizes that I wanted to build this at, so I will have some extra waste. But we all know there's truly no waste when it comes to a wood shop. I'll use these someplace. On the TSC 55K, I'll be using the 42 tooth fine blade with the 1.8 millimeter kerf. The first step in breaking down sheet goods is always creating a good clean edge to reference all your cuts off of. So that's what we'll do now. So the first cut is going to be the 734 millimeter rip, and then I'll come back and do all my cross cuts for these pieces, and then I'll jump on to the next piece of plywood. So all the measurements that I'm going to be using are metric, not imperial. A couple reasons for that. That's what I'm used to. Also, when I begin to drill the shelf pin holes with the LR32 system, I want this cabinet, the dimensions, to be divisible by 32 millimeters. You can switch it over to imperial, you just have to do that math. So the width of this first rip is going to be 734 millimeters. So I'll mark that on both ends. So I'm going to go ahead and spin this around to make the cut. Always be aware of your surroundings when you're flipping a guide rail around, especially if you have sprinklers in your shop. So I'll go ahead and line up my splinter guard, which is this clear plastic piece, because wherever I line that up is exactly where my saw is going to cut. We'll be cutting a small piece out of this later, but for now I'm just going to set it on the ground. You may have noticed that I've got the good side of the plywood facing up when I make that cut. Typically with a circular saw or even a table saw, you'll have that good side down to reduce chip out. With the guide rail and the splinter guard on the guide rail, as well as the tooth design of the saw, I don't have to worry about that. I can cut with the good or the bad side up, and I will have zero tear out. So now I've got two parallel edges on my piece of plywood. I need to create a cross cut that's perfectly square to those edges. What I'm going to use is just a good quality square. Line it up with the edge. Line my guide rail up against there. Make my cut, and I know it's perfectly square. So now with a perfectly square edge to my two parallel rips, I can begin cutting my other pieces. The first three are going to be all 544 millimeters. I could sit here and measure each one, but instead I'm going to go ahead and use my parallel guides so I know that each and every one of them is going to be exactly the same. With the parallel guide set up, before I make any more cross cuts, I want to switch out the clear plastic viewing window with the green splinter guard. With that on there, that's going to give me a completely splinter-free cut on both sides of the blade. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut three of these at 544 millimeter. So I brought up that scrap piece that I had earlier because there was one more piece I had to cut out of that, and it's exactly 544 millimeters, just like the ones I was cutting before. I'll just go ahead and cut that to the proper length, and then I'll be done with that length for the parallel guides. So now I'm going to go back to that first piece I was cutting all those cross cuts off of, and I need one more at 155 millimeters. This time I'm going to be using the narrow side of the parallel guides. Because I already know this piece is square, if I set these both at 155 millimeters, I know it'll be square and parallel. So now I've got the parallel guide set to 498 millimeters to do the final cut of that first piece of plywood we broke down. So with that first sheet of plywood broken down, I was able to utilize the parallel guides for the repeatable cuts. This second sheet Most of them are going to be one-off cuts. So it's just a matter of measuring, marking, lining up the splinter guard, and making our cuts. So if you notice that dust coming out, it's time to change this bag out or empty the bag. Figured it up, I've done around 35 feet of ripping on this 3/4 inch plywood with just this single bag. No camera tricks. I'll show you what we've got in here. So that's just with this bag, no dust extraction. So I'll start breaking this sheet down just like I did the other one. Now that I've got a nice straight edge to reference off of, take a good quality square, put that up here, line my guide rail with it. Now I can make that cut knowing that this edge is perfectly square with this edge. So later on in the project, I'll talk more about layout. For right now, I know that this is the first rip I did, this is the first cross cut I did, and that they're perfectly square. So I'm just gonna put a square there because I haven't cut anything on that edge over there yet, but I know this is the edge that I want to reference off of. So with that cut done, I know my width is 734 millimeters. So I'm gonna go ahead and mark that on there. But I haven't cut it to width yet. I know off the top of my head that that is 1175. So I'm gonna put that on there, but I'll come and cross cut it at a later date. So this will be the final cut of the base of the rolling MFT cart. With some of these narrow pieces, once I get my length marked down, I'll just run my square up against there, run that across, then I can just line my guide rail up with my pencil line and make my cut. This will be the last piece of plywood we have to break down. So now that I've broken down all the sheet goods, I've got everything cut to size, the next step is going to be to break down the hardwoods for the face frame material that I'm creating. I'm going to just put a scrap piece of plywood on top of the STM for a work surface. So for ripping down the hardwood, I'm going to switch over to the 3000 rail. And because I've calibrated these parallel guides to the saw prior to all this, I can take these parallel guides off the shorter rail, put them on the longer rail, and my accuracy will still be there. So when I rip this hardwood material down for the face frame material, I want to make it just a little bit wider than the actual plywood itself, which is about 18 millimeters. So I'll make this about 20 millimeters, and then I'll come back later with a 1010 router and a flush trim bit to get it nice and flush. So the maple that I'm using is a little bit of a warp to it. It's not really going to matter because I'm going to be ripping it down to narrow pieces, but I still want to use this other piece as a backer for my parallel guide. I can cut one piece, take it out, remove it, and just keep doing that, and I'll always have support from my guide rail. So I just went ahead and switched the blade to a 28 tooth ripping blade. It's going to speed up the cutting process a little bit. So this board has already been surfaced on all four sides, so it's got a nice, crisp, clean edge that I can reference off of. So I don't need to worry about putting a new edge on it to reference the parallel guides. I went ahead and paired the Bluetooth batteries to my CT48 AC, and I can make the cuts from there. So in total, we should need about 5 of these. I'm gonna cut 1 extra just to be safe. So now that I've got the narrower stock ripped down, I can go ahead and rip down the wider face frame stock for the shelf areas. Those mortises that are cut into the face frame that you're seeing on this diagram, those are for a reason we'll get to later. So with that one cut, we're done with all the ripping of the maple, hardwood, and the plywood itself. For now, we'll reset for working with the LR32 system. If you want to continue with the build, click here, or check this out. Don't forget to subscribe. If you want to be notified when we upload new content, click that notification bell.